All right. Okay, great. You got it. All right. Good morning, everybody. Whew. I guess fall has officially arrived. I walked out this morning in this like little vest to go get the donuts, and I walked out the door. And I was like, "Oh my God, it's freezing." Went back and changed to a ski jacket. I'm a big wimp. So, good morning, fellows, and I hope over the course of the year, you guys, I know this is a volunteer for you guys, but you get as excited as I know we on the administration side does. The whole week, I was crazed at work, but I was so excited for the energy you all bring to the room, and to the issues and to the future that you guys have, and the hope for the future. I want to go a couple quick things. One, the importance about this organization and what we're trying to do here is to have you engage and learn on civic topics. Everyone brings to the table a different viewpoint and a different level of knowledge. But we're here to help you increase your knowledge, increase your engagement. And with that, your views actually might change. So I will tell you, this could be a little controversial, that in one area on healthcare, mandatory healthcare, I was a big believer that it should be for everybody. And as I've read more things in my own opinion, I'm starting to move away from that a little bit. And that's controversial to believe that it should be those that have jobs or have other reasons. And there's reasons I have that. But the more I've read, my views have changed, for better or for worse. And one of the things you have the opportunity here today and over the next 6, 7 sessions is to meet people, to understand their views, to listen to these amazing speakers we have, and to see if you, as you get more knowledgeable, do your views change, or do they become cemented? All right, so be comfortable with what you know, be excited to learn more. The second quick point is, a number of you are juniors and seniors. I think most of you are juniors and seniors. There are a few 10th graders here. In another year or two, you are going to go to a college campus, and all of a sudden you're going to leave this little nest that you were in, this bubble, and you're going to realize there's a really, really big world out there with people from different backgrounds, different viewpoints. And it can be overwhelming, or it can be completely exciting. And it happens at any age. And embrace it. You know, as I told you, I think the last time, I got 2 kids in college on a very large campus at the University of Michigan, and they are blown away by the diversity they're experiencing on all levels. And it can happen at any age. We will send out next week a Financial Times article. The Financial Times is a paper you might not all know about. It's actually still it's printed in pink. It's actually a very interesting color they printed in. And there's a gentleman named Larry Summers. He was president of Harvard. He was very involved in the administration under Bush. And Larry would be considered very far right. What he just completed was a drive across the country. And I think for the first time, he started to see what America is. Wherever you are from or wherever your background is, we live in a bubble here. And when you start, in Chicago's a bubble, in LA and San Francisco's a bubble. And when you start to drive or experience small town America, you start to see things and see what they're going through. And Larry Summers actually says in this article, for the first time, his eyes was opened up to the rest of the United States. So it's a pretty cool article. All right. So we're going to start on a quick thing we start on for about 3 or 4 minutes is on civic topics you guys have come across since the last session. So this is where I throw the mic to you guys. So what civic issues have come up that you've seen in the newspaper, online, or wherever? Oh, seriously? There we go.
Yeah, so the killing of the U.S. journalist, I think his name like Jamal Khashoggi, that came up.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia. So you heard about that? Everyone, raise your hand if you heard about that. Okay. Raise your hand if you thought that came out of a Robert Ludlum mystery novel. Yeah, honestly, you read this, you're like, this is totally not real. Like, there's no way this could happen. But a gentleman who, I don't think he's a United States citizen, actually. I think he is permanent resident, which is a difference. But went into Turkey where he was to get a wedding license and permit. It was really messed up, and it's going to be interesting to see how our country handles this, because Saudi Arabia obviously is a very strong ally of ours. Oil, they buy a lot of stuff from us, but this is completely messed up. So it's going to be a very delicate balance. What else?
Voters having their registration taken away in Georgia and North Dakota.
You guys see that? All right. I'm not going to jump into that because I know our esteemed speaker is going to get into that exactly. What else? Pass that down.
I think this was in between with the whole Kavanaugh thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've actually. Yes, just the whole thing. Yeah. So we did address Kavanaugh last time, but it was in the middle of it going on. So the investigation was done. Not enough was done to change it, and he was elected on the Supreme Court, pretty much by party lines.
The Elizabeth Warren stuff, claiming her, DNA and Native American.
All right. Okay. So you want to give a little bit more information on it?
Basically, Elizabeth Warren took a DNA test, which revealed her I don't want to give false information about the numbers, but a very small fraction of her DNA was Native American. And so she was claiming how it was part of her identity and how she used it, in terms of politics.
Yeah, I think. Listen, I think. I'm trying not to be too unfiltered. Shh. Okay, so I think it was all right. So I think it's interesting, but I do think as this becomes more of a global, the world, and we all travel, I think we're all going to be 1% of something, multiple things. I will say, if you haven't ever done 23andMe, it's a wild website. It's a wild website. Go to 23andMe and start to look at that. It's pretty cool. What else? Shh. One more. Couple more.
The hurricane in Florida.
Yeah. So the front page. I don't know if this is good or bad. So I went to school down at Tulane. New Orleans, I consider my second home. And when Katrina hit, it was in the front page of the news for next 30 to 45 days. We just had the most severe hurricane hit the Panhandle and literally wipe out towns off the face of the earth. It's not on the front page. It's pretty remarkable. But that is, is it bad luck? Is it global warming? A lot of debates on that, but it is pretty messed up. All right, last one.
A bunch of research scientists released a report saying that the effects of climate change will basically be irreversible by 2030.
I did not see that. No, I did see a lot in climate change, but I didn't think it was reverse. No, I know. All right, shh. See, this is like I'm learning. See, it's a learning. It's a two-way street. All right, final 1 minute. Okay, so we're going to be discussing today voter rights and going to get into voter suppression. Last session, Becky talked about it. Sandra talked about the census. So a quick raise of hands. Has anyone seen a census? Okay. It's what? Yeah. So the census happened the next one is going to be in 2020. Okay. They're going to ask a tremendous amount of questions. One or two are controversial. The importance about the census is this really sets some voting, how many representatives this country, the certain cities, states get, okay? And other things information is gathered. This is really, really important. So it is going to be mailed to your home. There's other ways to be filled out. It would be a great project, an important assignment that when it comes out, you sit down with your parents and you fill it out with them, because it probably won't get filled out otherwise. We're going to hand this out because we feel that it's. Yeah, sorry, it was really expensive to print all these out for 75 people. But look at this. It's not to fill out, but pass it around over the next course of today. Look at the questions, understand the information. I would say our resident expert on this is Becky. So Becky will be around today to ask questions of why was this question asked, what about this, what's it mean? The census is massively important to the operational of this country, all right? It's a very serious form. Bring it home, talk about it, that's it. All right, Sanda, any final questions before we proceed forward? You guys ready? All right. So the woman who keeps us in line, Sanda, come on down.
You try keeping this one in line. Thanks, everybody. So we just got a question back there about what is the census and why it matters. We went over that really quickly, but it'll make a little bit more sense when you hear from our keynote speaker today and from the folks who are going to be framing our deliberation. So for our lead fellows, people who were with us last year, you may recall that our first session, we had Michael Waldman from the Brennan Center who talked to us about voting rights and gerrymandering. And it was a really great foundation. And we're very fortunate today to have a representative from the Brennan Center for Justice with us today, Zachary Roth, who heads their strategy and editorial. So just a little bit about the Brennan Center for Justice. Who in the room, have you heard of the Brennan Center for Justice? By show of hands. Okay, a couple hands. This is great. Yes, and thank you, Daniela.
Can I just, is there any, we seem to be short. There's like a whole group that has not gotten it. Does anyone?
Of the census?
Yeah, of the census.
Could we scroll up just to show the census here for those who don't have a copy?
I'm sorry.
Jeffrey, were there certain questions you wanted to bring attention to, or just to?
Just talk about, where do you live, how many people are in you, what's your telephone number, working, background, a lot of questions like that are there. All this information is compiled and provides a real foundation for when we look at household income, when we look at geographic, socioeconomic makeup of certain cities, states, in the country.
But some other things to notice are there are a lot of questions, right? And so people might not want to answer all those questions or might feel that some are invasive. Some of you have probably heard that the most controversial question, this is just a test census, the real census is in 2020, is a question about citizenship status. That would be new in 2020, and that is anticipated to be a big, big deterrent. Again, we can talk more about that later, but we just wanted to familiarize you a little bit with what this looks like, and we'll talk about it over the course of the year. Anything you wanted to say, Becky?
This census is used for multiple reasons, but one is for now, which is to count the number of people in a certain area so you can figure out how many representatives a state can get. And there's a fixed number of representatives in the House of Representatives. So if the population changes, then because everyone moves out to Arizona, then let's say New York State loses a representative. And that on a very political point, because I love New York, that would make me very sad. As a historian, what I love about it also is you learn about people. You can learn about how people are living, what are they doing, and I've looked at censuses 1840, 1860, 1870, 1940, and you can really understand how people were living, individuals. And that's important too when you're dealing with social scientists now, so they can understand how best to serve the, people. So the census has a lot of purposes. It's really dry, really boring, but it's necessary.
Our goal is to make civics sexy, but there's some parts that it's a little harder to make sexy, but this is a really important one. So again, we're gonna revisit this over time. So back to our keynote, and Zach, if you want to come up as I share a little bit about you. So Zach is part of the Brennan Center for Justice, and I want to read you a little bit about the Brennan Center for Justice because it's really one of our bulwark civic institutions, and it's so important, particularly now. So it is located downtown at New York University School of Law, and I just lost my notes about it. It is. Sorry about that, folks. It is a nonpartisan law and policy institute that works to reform, revitalize, and this is really important, when necessary, defend our country's system of democracy and justice. It is protecting the rule of law and the value of constitutional democracy. It focuses on voting rights, campaign finance reform, ending mass incarceration, and preserving liberties while maintaining national security. It is part think tank, part advocacy group, part cutting-edge communication hub. It starts with rigorous research. It crafts innovative policies. And again, importantly, it fights for them in Congress and in the states, the courts, and in the court of opinion. So you'll hear a little bit more about the Brennan Center, and we are very fortunate to have Zach Roth with us. So he, as I said, he is the Director of Editorial and Social Policy. Before he came to the Brennan Center, which I believe was just this spring, he was a reporter at MSNBC. He is also the author of a great award-winning book, The Great Suppression: Voting Rights, Corporate Cash, and the Conservative Assault on Democracy, all of which you'll be hearing a little bit about today. He's written for publications you may have heard about, like the New York Times, LA Times, The Atlantic, The New Republic, Slate, Salon, and many others. He could be anywhere in the world today, but he's here with us, so thank you, Zach.
Thank you. I don't know if it's quite true that I could be anywhere in the world today, but I'm very glad to be here. And thank you so much for having me, and thank you all mostly for being here, and just for caring enough about these issues to be involved with this project at all. You're already way ahead of where I was when I was at your age, and I'm impressed by that already, so thank you. As you all know, there's a big election coming up. Whichever side you're on, I think we can all agree that everybody should have the same access to voting and the same access to participation in this election and in all elections. And we are, unfortunately, already starting to see cases of voter suppression, of making it more difficult for people to vote around the country, as I think somebody mentioned a little bit earlier. And we'll get into some of those cases a little bit later. But first of all, I want to start with a number. 55.7%. Why did I put that number up there? Anybody have any clue what that number might be, how it might be relevant to voting?
Raise your hand, speak up, guys.
Yeah. Exactly right. That's the percentage of eligible American adults who voted in the 2016 election, 55.7%, so just a little over half. That was a pretty big election, right? However you felt about it, whether you were angry and upset, whether you were happy, it mattered that Donald Trump won that election. I think we can all agree. And yet, only a little over half of the people who had the chance to vote did so. So we're going to get into talking about why that is, why our voting rate is as low as it is. And that puts us, by the way, 26th out of a group of 32 developed countries. So we're 26th out of 32 on that, which is not great. We're going to talk a bit about why. But first I want to think a little bit about why do we even care? Why does it matter what percentage of eligible voters end up voting? The results count anyway. So let me put that to you guys. Anybody have any thoughts on why it matters whether a lot of people or a smaller number of people vote? Yeah.
Well, the elected official is supposed to represent the country as a whole, and if not everybody is voting, it doesn't present like an accurate representation of the values of our society and people voting. So it's absolutely it's absolutely necessary that every person who can vote does vote, because their voice is critical in having our representatives represent the values of our country as a whole.
That's exactly right. I couldn't have put it better. Now, maybe it wouldn't matter as much if the people that didn't vote were pretty much the same as the people that did vote. Then at least, even if everybody wasn't voting, at least everybody would basically be being represented in the way that she just said. But do we think that's true or not? Do we think that the people who vote look like the people who don't vote? No. That was an easy one. Right. In fact, the people who don't vote are more likely to be young than the people who vote, And let me move to the next slide here. There we go, voting rates by age. So you see people 65 and over, they're voting at the highest rate, 71%. Not much lower, 45 to 64. My cohort, 30 to 44, 59%. And then way down at the bottom, much lower than any of the others, is 18 to 29. So young people are voting at significantly lower rates than everybody else.
Also know, Zach, that this 18 to 29 is a huge age bracket, and 18 and 19-year-olds is actually in the low 30s in the 2016 election.
That's a great point. Even within that 18 to 29, there are differences, and the people who vote least of all are likely to be the youngest of all. And there are reasons for that, which we can talk about, but that is the reality right now. I could put up similar numbers for income and for education level and for race, showing that there are differences in all of those categories in terms of who votes. And let's think about what that ends up meaning. Let's take the example of Social Security, which is an issue that you guys probably don't need to think about very much. But it's an issue that politicians talk about a lot, protecting Social Security, meaning protecting the money that is going to allow seniors.
Okay, so just to jump in 1 second, you guys remember last thing we put the chart up there, and the big piece was government, was our military. What was the other two? Social Security, and the other one was Medicaid. Go ahead. So they saw it. They saw the
Okay.
big piece of what it meant for our federal budget.
So it is a huge, I think it's like 22% of our federal budget or something. And the reason for that is because politicians understand voters care about it. And most of the voters who care about it, or many of them, are seniors who it directly affects. And because seniors vote at such high rates, politicians of all parties, or the two big parties at least, are pretty much united. They may not be united on many things, but they are pretty well united on Social Security, on saying, we're not going to mess with Social Security. We're going to protect Social Security for you. And that's because seniors vote at such high rates. Take an issue that is just as important to young people as Social Security is to seniors, which is freeing young people from college debt. That's an issue that only just in the last few years have politicians even really started to say, hey, we need to help young people on this. And there is much less agreement that it's anything that we even need to do anything about at all. And the reason for that difference with Social Security is simply that young people don't vote at the same high rates. So that's why voting matters. It's why it's important. It's kind of why we care. But I want to go back to that 55.7% number. Why do we rank 26 out of 32? And the truth is, it's a very complicated question. There's a lot of sort of long-standing, deeply rooted reasons that we're not going to have time to get into here. And I'm not going to present what I'm about to say as kind of the single only reason. But I want to talk about one reason, which is that we make voting in many parts of America much more difficult than it needs to be. Oh, I skipped that one. Let's move on to this one. We make voting much more difficult than it needs to be. So here's just the basics, and I apologize if I'm going over stuff you already know, but it's worth thinking about. Just to vote, first of all, you need to register, and you generally need to do that at least a month or so ahead of the election. So you need to have the foresight ahead of the election to say, hey, there's an election coming up. I think I might want to vote in it. I'm going to make sure to be registered. In some places, you can do that online, but in some places, you can't. So you actually have to go to a government office or get a paper registration form somehow and go to somewhere like the DMV or another government office or get the form and fill it out. And then you're registered. Then you got to look for the thing that they send you in the mail that's going to tell you where your polling place is, because those change a lot, and you may not have voted at this place before. So you got to look for that. And who even checks their mail most of the time? I certainly don't. And then you got to remember on election day to go vote if you're living in a state that doesn't have early voting, which many states, including New York, do not. So you got to be available on election day when you may need to be working or going to school. You got to fit it in that time and go line up. You don't know how long it's going to take, and you got to go wait in line and vote. And there's no provision for most employers to allow people to take time off to vote. So there are people who, in order to vote, they're going to risk a paycheck. They may even risk losing their job to be able to vote. Now, for a lot of people, this isn't that difficult. I definitely do not want to convey the message that voting is this huge hassle and you shouldn't bother voting. That's not what we're saying. But you can start to see how it's going to be easier for certain groups than for others to end up voting. That the less time you have, the less money you have, the less access to the internet you have, the less experience with the system you have, the more you move around, the more you change your address, the harder it's going to be. And inevitably, that's going to end up making a few of those people say it's too much trouble, I'm not going to bother voting. Now, that basic system has been around for almost 200 years. And in fact, it was set up to be difficult on purpose. And here, one example of that, the first voter registration system we had was created here in New York City in the 1830s, almost 200 years ago. And that was in response to a whole big wave of new immigrants, Irish Americans, coming into New York and beginning to vote. And the people in power at the time didn't want new voters voting. They were pretty happy with the electorate the way it was. And so they created this registration system in order to create an additional kind of hurdle, an additional barrier to new voters coming into the system. And that, we continue to see some of that today. One other quick example, in the 19th century, you began to see these laws that barred you from voting if you ever had a criminal conviction on your record. So even if you had served your time and done your parole and probation and everything, you could not vote for the rest of your life. So the point is, there have always been efforts to make it more difficult to vote, especially for certain groups. But in the last decade, that's where we've seen a kind of resurfacing of this and a very deliberate effort to undermine democracy and to make voting more difficult, especially for certain groups. And I want to tell you a little bit about that, because whatever party you support, whatever your political views are, it's a real threat, I think we can all agree, to the fairness of our democracy. So if you care about voting and democracy, and since you're here, I assume you all do, it's something to know about. The first piece of that I want to mention has to do with the Supreme Court, which you all probably have heard a bunch about in relation to the Brett Kavanaugh stuff recently. But the reason why people care so much who sits on the Supreme Court is because the decisions it makes really matters on so many different issues, but including on the issues of our democracy, how easy it is to vote, how much money rich people can put into election campaigns, how we divide up districts in terms of gerrymandering, which you'll hear more about in a little bit. And about 5 years ago, or 5 years ago exactly, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Shelby County v. Holder. And that decision had to do with the Voting Rights Act, which, as many of you know, was the law that was passed in the 1960s after Martin Luther King organized that famous march in Selma, Alabama. And one of the things that the Voting Rights Act did, one of the most important probably the most important civil rights law, one of the most important laws we've ever had in this country, it said that in some parts of the country that have had bad, basically racist records on voting, it said if those parts of the country want to pass any new voting laws, they need to first prove that the law isn't going to make it harder for racial minorities to vote. They need to make sure that it's not another racist voting law, basically. And the Supreme Court, what it said in that case is it said, you know what? We've actually made so much progress on stopping racism in voting since then, in the last 50 years, that we don't need that part of the law anymore. So they got rid of it. And what that has done is it's made it much easier for cities and counties and states to pass all sorts of laws and rules and often little kind of below the radar stuff, which doesn't get the attention of the press, that just has the effect of making voting more difficult. And that's what we've seen in the last 5 years. Can you give a couple examples of those? Yeah. Since that decision, we've seen, I don't have the number at my fingers, but it's 500 and something changes to polling place locations in towns and cities around the South, which was the area that had been covered by that part of the Voting Rights Act. So when people go to vote, their polling place has moved, and they don't know where it is, and it can be difficult to locate. That was the kind of thing that before the Voting Rights Act was weakened, that city or that county would have to get that change approved by the Justice Department, where they would have to show, if we do this, it's not going to make it harder for racial minorities in our area to vote. Now they no longer have that safeguard, so they can do that pretty much without any oversight, and it has had the effect in certain places of making it more difficult to vote. That's kind of on the micro level. On the macro level, it's allowed states to pass statewide laws, like voter ID laws, for instance, in North Carolina, which passed a law saying you have to show photo ID to vote. It also, at the same time, cut early voting days. It said you couldn't register to vote on the same day as the election, same-day registration. So a whole kind of range of ways in one law that it made it more difficult to vote in North Carolina. That's a law that also would have had to have been approved by the Justice Department before this decision. Now it no longer did, and so it went into effect. And thanks to a bunch of groups, we actually sued and got parts of that law blocked in 2016, but it was in effect for several years, and parts of it are still in effect. So that's kind of the role of the Supreme Court on that. And what we've seen since then is a whole range of tactics to make voting more difficult. You probably heard about voter ID laws. Some states have passed laws saying that when you go to vote, you have to show a photo ID issued by the government. So that's a driver's license or a passport or a special voter ID that states have created. Now, most people have one of those things, but a lot of people do not. In fact, studies show about 10%, I think this was from a Brennan Center study that we did, about 10% of Americans don't have those. And the rate among racial minorities and the young is higher than 10%. So that's a lot of people at risk of being disenfranchised. Now you might ask, how hard is it to get an ID if you don't have one? Well, it can be difficult and expensive. Texas is one of the states that passed the voter ID law, and we at the Brennan Center fought it very hard in court. There are about 1.2 million eligible voters in Texas, about 600,000 registered voters who didn't have the ID required to vote when they passed that law. And by the way, one of the IDs that is accepted under that law is a gun permit, but an ID that is not accepted is a student ID, even from the University of Texas, which is a state-run university. So that's pretty clear in telling you what kind of voters they want voting and what kind of voters they do not want voting. So to get an ID, you have to travel to a DMV office or an ID issuing offices, which in some parts of Texas are only open during work hours. Might be an hour or two away. Texas is a big state. It can cost money because in order to get the ID, you need to show you have a birth certificate. A lot of people don't have a birth certificate. To get the birth certificate, you often have to pay money. So I spoke to one woman who she lived on a fixed income of only a few $100s a month. She said she was told she needed to pay $42 to get the birth certificate to then be able to get the ID, which would allow her to vote. And she said, I can't afford to do that. She said, I can't eat the birth certificate. So voter ID laws, that's one tactic. But some states have also cut the number of days or hours where you can vote before an election to make it less convenient. Some states, like New York, still don't allow early voting at all in the first place, so you have to hope that you can make it on election day or you're out of luck. A few states have passed laws saying that to register to vote, you have to show proof of citizenship. That makes it very hard to register because when you're out somewhere where you're likely to register, to run into someone with a registration card doing a drive, you're not likely to be carrying your birth certificate. I don't know about you, but that's not something I carry around in my back pocket.
Quick question. Does everyone know where their birth certificate is? Yeah. Do you guys know the Social Security card? Yes. All right, good.
You guys are...
I will tell you honestly, I'm shocked they have that many yeses. What? I totally don't. I know. Okay. So kudos. Okay. Shh. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe you guys are better organized than I was. I don't know that I could locate my Social Security card, at least. Last thing, some states have done big purges of the voter rolls. What that means is they take names off the list of registered voters because they think that the people might have moved or died, so they're kind of cleaning the list. That's something that they do need to do, and it's fine to do that if you're doing it very carefully and you're making sure that the people you're taking off the list really have moved or died. But a lot of states have been doing it very not carefully, whatever the opposite of carefully is. So what they've been doing is carelessly. Thank you. They've been saying, if you miss 2 elections in a row, we're going to send a letter to you first, and if we don't get a response to that letter, we're going to take you off the rolls. So you could decide to sit out 2 elections because you don't like the candidates. Then you go and show up to vote at the 3rd election, and they say, sorry, you didn't vote for two elections. We're taking you off the rolls, and you're out of luck. Related to that, to get into some of what we're seeing just in the last few weeks, in Georgia, they passed a law called an exact match law, where your name on your voter registration card has to exactly match your name in government databases like the DMV or Social Security or whatever. So if you write on your voter registration card Jane Smith, but it says in the DMV database Jane K. Smith, then they can say, sorry, it's different. We're going to put your registration on hold. And the Secretary of State in Georgia announced about 50,000 registrations have been put on hold for that reason. We call it at the Brennan Center disenfranchisement by typo, and that's something that we've done a lot of work to try to fight against. So that's all the range of stuff that we've seen to try to make voting more difficult. Now, how is it justified? Oh, I missed that slide, but there it is. Voter ID laws, cuts to early voting, proof of citizenship laws, voter purges. That's kind of the big stuff. Now, how do the people who support that justify it? They talk about illegal voting, and there is some illegal voting. There was they talk about people who are not citizens voting improperly, people who are not registered to vote, people who are ex-offenders and therefore not allowed to vote, people who are not living in the district voting fraudulently, all these various types of fraudulent or illegal voting. And there is some of that, but not very much. There was a study done by actually a guy who used to be at the Brennan Center, which found 31 cases of illegal voting out of 1 billion votes cast since 2000. So I haven't broken down the percentage, but you are actually more likely to be hit by lightning than to try to commit in-person voter fraud.
You're also more likely to win the lottery at $1.6 billion than have voter fraud.
There
Seriously.
You go. So, I think what you see from that is that the fix to this problem of illegal voting is way out of proportion to the problem itself, and ends up having the effect of disenfranchising many more eligible, legitimate voters than it stops illegal voters from voting. I want to talk about one other piece to this quickly. I'm not going to go into detail about it because the next presentation really is going to go into detail about it, and they're the experts. But another piece of this has been rigging the maps, what we call gerrymandering. And that is not an attempt to actually make it more difficult to cast your vote. It is an attempt to make it more difficult for your vote to count, so that your vote is less likely to count. And what that means is, so gerrymandering is drawing the district lines to benefit one party over the other. And in most states, people who draw the lines are the same politicians who are going to be running for office. So they're using those maps. So that's a pretty big conflict of interest, right? They get to actually draw the lines that determine who are going to be their own voters. Now, in a bunch of big states, both parties have done this many times in the past. In a bunch of big states, the last round when it was done, in 2011, 2012, Republicans were in control, and they drew the lines in such a way as to advantage their party. And they had really sophisticated software to be able to do it, because obviously every year the software is getting better and better at being able to draw lines in such a way that you distribute your own party's voters as efficiently as possible, so they're spread out into a bunch of districts, and they're making a little over 50% in a whole lot of districts, and then you pack all the other party's voters into a much smaller number of districts. So they're really inefficiently spread out. So the way that you've done it benefits your party and makes it much easier for your party to win the larger number of seats. And one of the results was you had, for instance, in Pennsylvania, which is really a very evenly split state. You have just about the same number of Democrats as Republicans, but you've ended up having in every election since then, Republicans have won 13 congressional seats, Democrats have won 5, simply because of the way that the lines have been drawn. So whichever party you support, I think you can agree that that's a result that doesn't reflect what voters want. If voters are roughly equally split between the two parties, they should each win a roughly equal number of seats. And that's not happening. That's thanks to this gerrymandering, which you'll hear more about. So I want to talk very quickly about the power of democracy, because we see all of these efforts to make voting more difficult and to undermine democracy. And ultimately, that's being done by people who are afraid of what full, true democracy is going to mean. They recognize that voting has power, and they're afraid of what will happen if everyone really has an equal say. And that's worth thinking about and remembering when we're thinking about kind of the importance of voting. And happily, it's not all doom and gloom, too, because in response to this campaign, there has been an equally strong campaign, which has really gotten going in the last couple years to protect democracy and also to expand it. And that means not just fighting off these bad voter ID laws and other restrictions, it means fighting for ways to actually make it easier to participate. And that's a big part of what we're doing at the Brennan Center, too. One of the key kind of cool new ideas that we've been pushing, and that has actually been passed now by 10 or 11 states, I think, is called automatic voter registration. And that works by automatically registering you to vote if you're eligible, anytime you come in contact with a government office like the DMV or a social service office, unless you specifically say, no, thank you, I don't want to register. So, and the states that have already implemented that have begun to see huge increases, as you'd expect, in their voter rolls. So that's an extremely promising reform to make it much easier to vote, especially for groups that previously had been marginalized. Some states allow you to register to vote on election day. So if you're not registered in advance, it's sort of one-stop shopping where you can just show up at the polls and register and vote. And there's an effort underway to spread that to more states too. And then the last thing I want to talk about on this score, which is really one of the most important and kind of inspiring things going on, has to do with those laws that say you can't vote if you have a criminal record in your past. When I was a reporter at MSNBC, I interviewed a woman in Florida. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about Florida, but I interviewed a woman in Iowa whose name was Kelly Griffin. And Iowa is one of those states, one of the few states actually still, that has laws that say if you ever have a felony in your past, you can't vote for the rest of your life. But the rules change in Iowa according to who the governor is. A new governor will come in and loosen the rules, and then another governor will come in and tighten them. So this woman, Kelly Griffin, had come out of prison a few years earlier, and she had been told that she was now allowed to vote because she had completed her sentence and her probation, and that was the rule at the time. Then, she didn't know this, but a new governor came in and changed the rule and said anybody who has a felony anywhere in their record can no longer vote. She, not knowing this, went to the polls to vote. She brought her kids with her because she wanted to show them the importance of voting. She voted. A few days later, she got a knock on the door from a state investigator who said, I want to ask you some questions about your voting. Eventually, she was charged with illegal voting, and she faced 5 years in prison. Now, thankfully, once the jury heard all the facts in the case, in about 20 minutes, they acquitted her, and she was able to go home to her kids. But it's one of the ways in which fear is spread about voting, so that people begin to think, hey, maybe voting is a little bit dangerous, and maybe if I'm not sure about the rules, maybe I shouldn't do it because it could get me in trouble. Now, what's happening in Florida right now, which is really the biggest state that does this, that disenfranchises former offenders, there are 1.6 million people in Florida, disproportionately non-white, who can't vote because of a past felony conviction. And that's 1 in 5 African Americans in Florida, by the way. But this year, there is a ballot initiative, so that's a question on the ballot, that when you show up to vote, it's a question that you can vote yes or no on. And the question is, should we end that system? Should we re-enfranchise? Should we allow to vote people that have a past felony conviction, as long as it's not a violent crime, like a murder or rape? And it looks like, according to polls, that is very popular, and that I don't want to make any predictions, but it looks likely to pass. And that would be a huge deal that would restore the vote to 1.5 or 1.6 million people in Florida. And that's something that the Brennan Center has been involved in actually from the start. So I want to wrap up by saying, as kind of a takeaway, we can all disagree on issues like how we should run our healthcare system, or how high taxes should be, or immigration, or foreign policy and foreign wars. That's all legitimate subjects for debate. But what I think is not a legitimate subject is everybody having the equal ability to participate in our democracy. And the truth is, voting is so powerful, as we said, that a lot of people are afraid of what will happen if too many people vote. And so there is this effort underway right now to limit it. And there is also this effort, as we've seen, to expand it and to make voting easier and to make sure we have a system that represents all of us. And the outcome of that fight, which side ultimately wins that fight, is going to be one of the key things that determine the future of our country. And so whatever political views you have, again, whichever party you support, whatever you think about the issues, if you care about our civic health, and I think that all of you do since you're here, then it's worth getting involved in that fight and getting involved on the side of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you go back to the slide that has the percentages, the very first slide? All right, so we're going to go back to one quick slide. What was the most shocking thing you heard from his talk?
That in Texas, people can register to vote with a gun registration. The gun.
If you don't have a gun, you're not cool in Texas.
Personally, I thought the craziest part was the story about the lady who was almost about to be sent to jail for trying to vote.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up. You know, you go to jail because you've done a crime, and you come out because they said you've served your time and you're allowed back to civilization. You're supposed to be able to go on and relive your life, and have that held against you is brutal. All right. So the last session, we talked about the military, we talked about the healthcare and the service and the Social Security being the biggest chunk of the federal budget. I want you to have a political ear now going forward. On the radio, in the newspaper, in the news, you are continually hearing political ads, correct? I want you to hear the messages they're giving and who they're talking to. Look at these percents. Does anyone here care about Social Security? No. Okay. They're talking to old people, 45 and older, because I know you guys think 45 is old. Come back to haunt you someday. And the amount of percentage. This group, last year you guys went out on gun marches, gun violence. A lot of press, right? Has anyone heard a thing about it in the last month? You know why? What are they betting on? You're not going to show up, okay? So a politician has a certain number of dollars to spend and a certain message they have to get out. They're going to go to the group that they think is going to come out and vote, because 55% of the people vote, and those people, they're going to go after the ones who vote most likely to vote. You guys' pattern has not been to vote. So government, the politicians will not speak to you, will not listen to you until they believe that you are truly a voting force. Until that happens, they'll appease you on your marches and your walkouts. But you're not seeing them do it in their campaigning message, okay?
We know most of you aren't 18 yet, but there's an adult in your life, and some might be citizens, some might not be. But you probably know a citizen who's over 18 and has the ability to vote. So besides walking out, doing the demonstrations, you can do personal advocacy towards the people who can vote. And that is almost more powerful than the marching, because they know that if you care about, they care about you and you care about them. I went around to a couple of the groups during the morning to show that I get this every year, for voting, and this gives the blurbs about who the candidates are and these obscure ballot initiatives that are mentioned. Read them. If you have a voter in your home, you will get this. Look at it. It's really kind of interesting. You can also go online and get it. So you can be your own advocate.
All right. So I've been able to get up and walk around a little bit. You guys haven't. So you're probably sitting there going, this is hell. So what we're going to do is stand up. All right. If you believe, if your number one cause in the election coming up is gun control, move over here. Gun control. Okay? Gun control is over here. I want you to come up, move over in this corner. Just for a minute.
Specifically about.
Just gun doesn't matter. Just say you care about it doesn't matter. For or against doesn't matter. Just you feel gun. If you think it should be doesn't matter what side of it. Just curious. That's gun control. If you feel it should be immigration, over here. Okay? If you believe it's the Supreme Court, over here. Okay? President-elect nominates the Supreme Court justice. Okay? Is there another issue you guys think is more important? Climate change over there. Okay, shh. Trade in the middle, in the aisle. What else? Shh. What? All right, education. Let's do education in the seats. Right over here. Okay, so next to For Freedom, behind the back there, next to For Freedom, education. What else? Tax reform. Okay. Tax reform up by the monitor here. Let's go, guys. Move. Come on, move. Let's go. What? Student debt. Student debt, the table. Let's go. Shh. All right. What's over here? Gun control. Who's over here? Raise your hand. What's over there? Immigration. In the middle? Trade. Education's where? For Freedom's education. Over here is what? Student debt. Climate. What am I missing? Supreme Court, where? Back corner. Campaign finance reform. Who believes in campaign finance reform? Raise your hand. All right. A lot of issues, aren't there? Not once has it been Democratic or Republican. You should be looking at what you believe the candidate speaks to you about. Doesn't matter what party they are. It's what the issues you personally believe in. All right? So what's really interesting is we have a very diverse group of people, and you've got people from all the 14 schools, different areas, on different causes. And that's what makes us great. Okay? All right. We're to sit back down. Different seat. Mix it up a little bit. Yeah, don't take the same seat. Mix it up. Because I know you're sitting with your little clique of people from school. Break out, guys. Meet others. It's kind of cool. Sorry, fellows. I'm trying not to say the word guys. I don't mean guys as a male thing. Fellows, let's go. Let's go. All right. Come on, let's go. 5, 4. Thank you. See, it's all yours. Please. Answer my emails. I'm so sick of them right now. All right. Thank you. Can we have a round of applause? Thank you very much. The Brennan Center is an amazing bipartisan organization, and they have a lot of events that happen throughout the year that anyone of any age can go to. Really, we'll get it out to you guys, but recommend you guys go and check out what's coming up. All right.
Excellent. And if you are like me, you have a lot of questions that you want to ask Zach, and you're going to have an opportunity to do that at the end of our session today. So write them down, make sure you don't forget them. We'll have great opportunity. But now there's more. So Zach previewed some stuff about redistricting. And we are very fortunate today to have folks with us from the Redistricting Values Discovery Project. And you may ask, what are redistricting values? You are going to learn very soon. And you are actually the very first audience in what is going to be a national tour engaging in deliberations, much like what you're going to do today. So you are the pioneers, also the guinea pigs. We'll be really excited for your feedback. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Redistricting Values Discovery Project as I welcome Steve and Fred to join us up here at this table. This is a brand new project. Yes, you can give them a hand. You want to come down to your applause, Fred and Steve? Come on down. You're the next contestants on the Civics Are Right. So the Redistricting Values Discovery Project is engaged in discovering what the public's values are for redistricting, developing algorithms and software to generate good redistricting plans. So think about that, algorithms to do this, and advocating sound and fair procedures for redistricting. And we are very fortunate to be joined by two of the principals of this project, Steve Kimbrough, who is, again, listen carefully, a decision scientist who specializes in computational methods for supporting and improving decision making. He is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, where he teaches and does research on business analytics, modeling, and decision making on strategic interaction. So this isn't the typical stuff that you always think of for people who are involved in politics, and it's a really interesting perspective to bring. Steve has had a long-standing interest in policy matters. At the age of 21, he was appointed as a member ever to a state policymaking and agency governance board in Wisconsin. He was the youngest person ever to serve in that capacity. And several years later, he was elected the chair. So this is a good role model for you. Youngest person ever, and in a few years became the chair. He's also been involved in successful lobbying business in Wisconsin, and his policy foci today are mainly in redistricting and in energy transition. We are also joined by Fred Miller and, Fred Murphy. Their third partner is Peter Miller, so you'll forgive me. So Fred is a professor at Temple's School of Business. He is a professor emeritus where he taught for many years. He has also been a senior visiting research fellow at the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Saudi Arabia. So you may have questions about that when we have questions and answers at the end. So it's very fresh. Excellent. We're glad you're back and intact. Prior to joining Temple, he was at the Energy Information Administration of the U.S. Department of Energy, where he headed the group that did the economic impact analyses of the energy-related bills and laws during the Carter administration. So we have some real heavyweights with us today. They're going to walk us through redistricting values. When we break up into your groups, you are going to have the opportunity to opine about what are the redistricting values that matter most to you and to give feedback as part of this National Discovery Project. So, very excited to have you, Steve and Fred.
Thank you. Is the mic working? Yes. And I need a clicker to advance the slides. Fred, do you want to sit or do you want to talk?
I'm going to sit here, but Steve's going to do the presentation.
Right, so I'll walk us through it. But Fred will interject as needed. I wanted to...
Do you want us to get out the crib sheets during or after?
It doesn't matter to me, either one. I would like, we have 20 minutes, is that right? 15 to 20. So can you, somebody wave at me? But I think, you guys know this Pachachka idea? It's an interesting thing. Anyway, we're gonna have a speed. We're gonna have a speed drill basically in a minute. But first, I wanted to say it's traditional to say you're happy to be here. We're very happy to be here. But let me say a little bit more. We're here today. The purpose of this exercise is that we want to help you think through what your values are. We're not telling you what to think. We want to help you think about this carefully, the redistricting problems. And it's really a matter of great pleasure to contribute to someone else's thinking things through, right? To be of assistance in that way. The second thing is that we're here as scientists, and we have ulterior motives, and that is that we're getting data from you, and we're going to make this data available to other people to let them understand how other people think and so forth. And I hope and I expect actually that you would take the same pleasure and joy in contributing to science and making knowledge that everybody in the world has access to. And the third,
science in political science.
then putting the science in political science. There we go. Finally, Sanda and this whole the whole team here, I know it takes the same great pleasure in affording people thinking things through and creating scientific data and so forth. So I just wanted to say that we proceed in a spirit of great joy in mutual assistance. So let's go forward that way. Okay. If things can work here. I got it backwards. Okay, so now the speed drill begins. So we had, Zach gave a wonderful introduction for what we're talking about, but I'll go very quickly here as background, and then we'll get into the meat of the things. Basically, the U.S. Constitution says every 10 years you have to have a census. Whenever the census is done, once every 10 years, first is called reapportionment, which decides how many congressional districts, how many seats in the House of Representatives each state gets. That used to be done politically. It's done as a formula now, and that's automatic. And once that's done, then redistricting happens because each state has changed its population and has perhaps a new number of representatives, and they have to decide which representatives represent which geographic areas. And they're constrained a little bit, but the states have the decision at this point. And which means, and that's called redistricting, and we're on about redistricting here because reapportionment is no longer an issue. It's automatic. So normally, not in all cases, but normally it's the politicians and the state legislature that decide who's going to draw the lines. And Zach brought up the famous line here. It's redistricting is the method by which politicians choose the voters, right? It's supposed to be the other way around, but that's what happens. And then we have this concept of gerrymandering, which I think should be defined as abuse of power in redistricting to favor one party over another, right? It's basic. I think we can define it fairly as abuse of power, favoring one party over the other. So we're on about that. We're against it, but let's go here. So now the question is, well, what is a good, what's a non-abusive plan, a non-gerrymandered plan? And the point here is that in most cases, when it's done by politicians in some state, it's not an interesting question because it has an obvious answer. A good plan is one that helps our party and screws the other guys, right? This is no longer being socially acceptable, and regardless of what the Supreme Court is going to do or did not do, that there's basically a groundswell of support for not accepting this anymore and insisting that the redistricting be done in the public interest, right? And so we're part of that. And so the question, and it becomes easier also to abuse this power because of big data and better computing. So the question is, what constitutes a good plan for citizens? And that is not such an obvious, it doesn't have such an obvious answer, and that's what we're about. And it's going to involve making difficult trade-offs. So, and just before this, we had all these different issues that were out there, but in general, you only get to vote for one candidate, and you're going to have to make compromises about the candidate's stand on this issue versus the candidate's stand on that issue. And so what we're about is trying to find ways of getting baseline information to help make these trade-offs, okay? I want to emphasize that what we're about here is to asking you what you think the trade-off should be. Okay. One question Sanda asked us, well, tell us how this shakes out between liberal, conservative, libertarian, whatever, Democrats and Republicans. Basically, as Zach quite correctly said, historically both parties have been abusive. I don't really care if one party has historically been more abusive than the other. That would be quite contentious. But the fact is they both have done it. And the basic thing to remember is if you're in the majority party, then you don't want citizens' commissions that are nonpartisan making these decisions. And if you're in the minority party, historically, you want citizens' commissions who are nonpartisan making the decisions. And it's that cynical, okay? But again, we're here to ask you what you think, or to begin that at least, okay? And I think I've really made all these points. This is not partisan, and I want to move quickly in times. Now, this is a wonderful graphic that there are different versions of this around. I got it off the Wikipedia. I give full credit here. And the guy just did a great job. I loved it. And we could spend a whole day on this graphic. But here's the basic thing. If you look on the left here, can I point? So imagine an imaginary state with 50 districts, right? And we have to get 50 precincts. We have to get 5 districts, so like 5 Congress people out of this. And the voters break down. Some of them are green and some of them are yellow, sort of. And the yellows are in the majority and the greens are in the minority with 40% of the vote. So the question is, how do we draw the lines to get 5 districts out of here? Well, one way to do it is like here. You could just draw it vertically. Notice that every district underneath is sort of a microcosm of the larger, the state. But the result is that the yellows get all of the seats and the greens get none of them. You see that? Because the yellows are in the majority in each case. Well, maybe we should make it so that the greens get 40% of the seats and the yellows 60%. Well, one way to do that is like this. Can you see there's 3 yellow and 2 green. It's representative and fair in some sense. Can you see a problem with this? Anybody? Yeah.
I mean, the one on the left is just like very homogeneous.
Exactly. Do we really want that, right? And what does that encourage? That encourages a minority within one party to win the primary election, right? Maybe a more extreme view. Sound familiar? So there are other ways of dividing it up. So this is really probably very unsatisfactory. This really has its problems. And over here, there are other ways to get 3 green and 2 yellow, and we have these more mixed districts. And you can think about this one, say, versus this one or this one, and what do you really want? What's good public policy? What's in the interest of the citizens and of our polity? And that's what we're really about here. Okay, so is there a better way? Well, one thing we can do is actually hold public discussions about what matters, about trying to figure that out. So far as we know, not only are you the first group of basically underage pre-voters to look at this carefully, but as far as we know, no one has ever actually gone around and asked these questions of very many people, of what do you really want in a good redistricting plan, okay? So that's what we're about. And we're going to, as I said, we're going to put the data together, put summaries of various kinds, and we're going to make it publicly available, and this is available to science. Here's a picture of a gerrymandered plan. This is where we live in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, and Zach mentioned it, so historically, it's about 51% to 49% for one party. It goes back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans for the last 10 years, but it's fairly close. But the Republicans have consistently gotten 13 of the 18 seats. And you can see some gerrymandering problems here, like the 7th district, which we'll see more. You see how that goes all over the place? That's suspicious. The 6th is the same way, even the 16th, and so on. So these are very oddly shaped districts, and they should raise your suspicions. And in fact, regardless of the shapes of these things, the plan overall is highly unfair. And fortunately, it was thrown out by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So that we're now voting in a couple of weeks on a different plan. Okay? So how would we evaluate? Well, in fact, there's going to be multiple criteria. That's what's so difficult about this. So now I'm going to whip through this, but you're going to be asked to sort of judge trade-offs between these different criteria. We can't do all of them, but we can do some of them, and that's information. So the first one that everybody talks about is compactness, which has 40 different definitions. Nobody agrees on what it is. They can all be gamed. There's all problems with them. But we're going to finesse this by having a 5-point scale, right? And so 5 is going to be best, and 1 is going to be worst in general. And we have what's called a phrase-anchored scale, which is used in social science a lot. And so that's our scale. And you might ask yourself, why might people value or not value compactness, right? So we put up a few reasons here. These will be in your crib sheet. But as you make your decisions and your deliberations, you should think about, is this important? If so, why is it important, right? So that some there. So here's a map. This is this particular district, the 7th. This is the one from the gerrymandered map. And these are in 10-year things going back. So you can see it used to not be quite so gerrymandered or oddly shaped, and just get worse and worse. And then it really went over the edge, right? Right. So you might think of, how would you score these guys from 1 to 5? So this would presumably be a 1 is the worst case, et cetera. Okay, a second criteria, and there will be 4 that we'll look at, is partisan advantage. In a bad case, you might get one party getting, say, 45% of the vote, but 70% of the seats. Do you have a question, or you just want the? Yeah, okay. And so one party just gets kind of a minority of the vote, and yet gets a big majority of the seats. And you can have gradations, and on the best side, highest scoring is 51% of the votes and maybe 55% of the seats. But all of these things are not only possible but common. 5 minutes, okay, great. So I'm going to move quickly. And so you might think about why people want to minimize partisan advantage. Remember, on the scale, 5 is always better than 1, although it might be minimizing something. Competitiveness, this is in the newspapers a lot. They'll talk about safe versus leaning versus toss-up seats. And so we're going to say more competitive is more like a 5, less competitive is more like a 1. And you might think about why that's a good thing or not. And finally, place splitting is our 4th attribute. And I live in Montgomery County, and in the previous very gerrymandered thing, Montgomery County was split into, I think, 4 or 5 different congressional districts just to mess us up, right? just to dilute the votes. And place means a lot of things to people. To split up a city or a college campus, for that matter, or a county and so forth is generally a bad thing. So you want as few place splits as possible. So a 5 is not many, and a 1 is very many place splits. And those are our basic concepts. We have handouts for you to look at. We listed a few more common attributes, but we've identified more than 30 that are in the literature. We can only look at some of these. And here is a preview of what you're going to be asked. So this is actually a graphic associated with the first question. And I want you to, I'll say it here, but it's all written down for you. So imagine you have before you 2 different redistricting plans. On all attributes of interest, they come out pretty much the same. You really are more or less indifferent between them. They're really pretty much the same, except for 2 attributes. And those 2 attributes are compactness and competitiveness. And the compactness plan has a 5. It's like really great on compactness, but it only has a 3 on competitiveness. It's sort of mediocre. The other plan is mediocre on compactness and great on competitiveness. And the question is, which one do you prefer? Which one do you like better, and why? And understand, there's no right or wrong answer here, but there are good reasons and bad reasons, and there's good thinking and clear thinking. And I put it to you that this is a difficult question involving values and trade-offs. We're asking you to think carefully and tell us what you think. That's what all of this is about. And I think that's pretty much it. There's 2 handouts, the questionnaire and crib sheets. I point to Sanda's questions about when you're doing this, think about is this going to affect the election and turnout? Yes?
Can you just go a little more, competitiveness is the hardest one to understand. Can you just give a little more explanation of what, when you talked about safe, the freedom and what that means?
Sure. Okay, and there's more information in the crib sheet, and I didn't put it here. But competitiveness, as I said, is often written up in the newspapers. You'll see this or in political stuff. But very roughly, what people normally mean is a district is competitiveness if either party has between a 45 and 55% chance of winning the election, right? Those are rough numbers that are used in practice, right? And that says the seat is, it could be, depending on the year and so forth, could be won by either party. The seat is considered safe if it says had a more than a 60 or 65% chance of going in any given election year for going for a particular party, whether that's the Democrats or the Republicans. So in Philadelphia, right where Fred lives, there are in fact whole precincts where there are no Republican votes. It's not corrupt. There's just nobody lives there as a Republican. Those are very safe seats for the Democrats, right? It doesn't matter who's on the ballot, et cetera. And there are areas in rural Pennsylvania where there aren't any Democrats. So those are very, very safe seats for the Republicans.
And you see that in New York City in terms of the Democrat-Republican split in your neighborhoods.
Yeah. And then there are the seats that are in the middle that are leaning. So they favor one party or another, but in a big election year or a very corrupt candidate or very high-quality candidate, you could have an outcome that would go against the party favored by the leaning. Does that help? Thank you for the question. And that's it for us for now.
Thank you. I'm going to go over the next. You can stay up here or you can sit down. I'm just going to go over. So building on the question that Becky asked, you are going to have time in your small groups to go over all of these factors. Lead, folks, if I can just have your attention for one more minute. We're going to be splitting up soon. We're going to be going into rooms where, you are going to get pizza. Civic mentors on your way out. If I could ask the civic mentors, each of you are going to, in your pair, you're going to pick up 2 boxes to bring to your room. Civic Fellows, you have on your name tag the room that you will be going to. It's also on the sheet that you have. So you'll want to look on your program to see how your number matches to a room. You should have a crib sheet. Your lead fellow will talk you through the questions. The other thing that's important is you're going to choose one person to enter results into a poll, and we'll go over that to you. We're going to come back here at 1:30, so an extra 10 minutes, okay? Go at it.